Welcome back to the Toolkit Depot studio out here at Optus Stadium this Wednesday morning in Perth. Well, of course, footy in WA kicks off in earnest on Saturday night at Optus Stadium. We have the Indigenous All Stars game, the Indigenous All Stars versus the Fremantle Football Club. And joining us to talk about that game on the show today is Codesports Eliza Reilly. Eliza, welcome.
Morning, Duff, and great to have you back on there for 2025.
Oh, I didn't feel like I had long enough off that 3 months break, Eliza. It felt like it was too short.
Hey, must be nice.
Yeah, it is nice, very nice. Hey, a couple of questions without notice before we talk about the footy. I was reading a story on Codesports this morning about the emerging marketing power of Mary Fowler, the Matildas star, and obviously that is part of the emerging brand that are the Matildas. Overnight, we saw that Sam Kerr has been found not guilty on that racism charge in the UK. Do you think, as a prominent female journalist covering the AFLW as well as the Matildas, do you think that Sam Kerr can retain the captaincy of the Matildas, or do you think she has to hand it over now?
My personal view on this, and it's been pretty similar the whole way through, regardless of the outcome of the court case last night, being that she was obviously found not guilty, is that she should be stripped of the captaincy. That's my personal view. People will have differing opinions, but she's, we know she's one of the best women's footballers in the world, but she shouldn't have the right to retain the captaincy because, let's face it, if a male was, in the same situation, guilty of the same behaviour, being drunk in a taxi and, public damage to a taxi, regardless of the situation and the sort of view from Sam and her partner that they were at danger and the driver was driving erratically, I just don't think that a male in similar circumstances would retain a leadership position, and I don't think Sam should be any different personally.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think that Sam Kerr should continue to play for Australia because she is one of the world's best women's footballers. She's an outstanding player. We all love watching her play and we all love watching her score those incredible goals. But I think the leadership position she holds and I think the status the Matildas now hold in the Australian community suggests that they have to move on from her as their leader in the wake of this. Because unfortunately, the not guilty verdict is the not guilty verdict, and I can't believe really that the British police and prosecutors wasted people's time and money taking this as far as they took it. But we also all saw the behaviour on video and heard the words spoken, and those sorts of things suggest that it's time to move on from Sam Kerr as the captain of the Matildas. Second question without notice. We've heard this morning that Josh Carr will succeed Ken Hinkley as the coach of the Port Adelaide Football Club at the end of 2025. Josh will start a 3-year term as coach of Port Adelaide in 2026. Of course, we call these things curability agreements after the infamous Bob Hawke, Paul Keating pact in politics to hand over the prime ministership around about, I think it was either the late 80s or the early 90s. Do curability agreements work in AFL football, in your view?
Well, I personally think history shows that they don't. We've seen a few succession plans, Mick Malthouse to Nathan Buckley, and while Nathan Buckley was very successful and took Collingwood to a grand final, ultimately didn't walk away with that grand ambition of a premiership. We've seen Paul Roos in succession plans to John Longmire, and that has yielded a premiership for the Swans, but it could have yielded many more. I think that's probably the best example we probably have, but there have been several unsuccessful ones, and I think this was almost the fait accompli that they'd hand over the reins to Josh Carr. I think Josh Carr has the resume and the sort of experience to be a senior assistant coach, but probably not at Port Adelaide. It's obviously a place he wanted to stay and continue his coaching journey, and that's what the club and he and Ken have come to an agreement on. But it's just that situation where you're in between sort of two worlds heading into this year. You've still got 1 year of Ken, and he would love to take the power back to a final series and achieve that ultimate goal of a premiership. But at the same time, you're casting an eye forward to Josh Carr's era, and he might be trying to make a few changes and sort of try and instill a few things that can ease his transition. So I just think that sort of situation of being caught between the push and shove of two different voices, ultimately that they're going to switch over at the end of the year, is probably not the best situation for football clubs to be in, as we saw with Sam Mitchell and Alistair Clarkson as well.
Promise I will get on to Fremantle and Indigenous All Stars game, Eliza, but a question from Noddy, of course, one of our great listeners and always makes really insightful observations. Can you recommend to your listeners to read Eliza's brilliant personal story about her concussion journey and subsequent retirement from footy? A brilliant read that all should read. Of course, this is the story you wrote for Codesports. I think, was it your third or fourth concussion, and you passed out at a press conference in front of Justin Longmuir and decided it was time to give the game away?
Yes, and thank you for that, Noddy. It was I've been grappling with it for a while about whether I should write about it, and sort of had a few nudges from friends and family suggesting that I should, because it is such a prominent issue, and it is rare, I guess, that we've had a sports journalist who's been able to share their insight into concussion and articulate it from a first-person perspective. It's usually us, the journalists, trying to, extract pretty traumatic stories and, experiences from athletes. So I sort of sat down and thought if it could help anyone who's in a similar situation going through concussion or concussion symptoms, then it's probably worth writing, as scary as that was to do. So, pretty difficult piece to write, probably the hardest story I've ever written to go through my sort of journey. But have ultimately decided after 3 concussions that it's probably curtains for me in terms of my playing days. And the big thing I found is just, while we're speaking about it so often from an AFL perspective, I was obviously involved in community amateur football, and the lack of support I felt I received was quite an eye-opener, I have to say, in terms of the sort of lack of check-ins and support and structures to support footballers going through it at that very baseline level.
Let's get on to the Indigenous All Stars game coming up at Optus Stadium on Saturday night. What do Fremantle try and get out of this?
Oh, it's going to be bloody hard, isn't it? Because I think the All-Stars are just going to try and kick as many goals, take as many screamers and hangers as they can. So it's going to be an exciting game. But I think for Fremantle, it's purely just going to be a bit of match fitness and that sort of game-like scenarios. It's not going to be a traditional pre-season match, as we know. It's going to be a spectacle, an exhibition game, a showpiece event. But for Fremantle, it's probably going to be experiencing what it's like to play against a really fast-flowing, free-moving side who we expect are going to be all offense, not much defense. So that could actually be quite a good lesson for them coming up into the season, knowing that they are one of the better, stronger defences in the AFL, and sort of testing out their defence against a very good and talented offence. But I think it's purely going to be just getting the miles into the legs, getting players familiar with that match day experience and seeing what else they can take out of it.
Yep, I tend to agree. I think their small defenders will know they've been in a game, the Fremantle defenders, because they've got a lot of them. Obviously, they're not so blessed with tall players and key position players. I see Sydney's Joel Hamling, former Fremantle player and former Western Bulldogs premiership player, has been put on standby to play in the game. And obviously, young West Coast Eagles ruckman Cohen Livingston looks like he might lead the Indigenous All Stars ruck. So they're a bit light on for talls, but they're certainly very blessed with highly skilled and very quick small forwards in particular. Fremantle captain Alex Pearce obviously was going to play for the Indigenous All Stars. He's been pulled out of the game with that ankle injury suffered in match simulation last week. How bad is that, Eliza, and what's the prognosis for Alex over the coming weeks?
So it's going to be the one the Dockers will continue to monitor heading into. They've obviously got another pre-season game against Melbourne down at Rushton Park in a couple of weeks' time, and another intra-club the Sunday after the All Stars game. So those are two, obviously, opportunities Alex will have to play and continue that match fitness. But I think the Dockers just felt, particularly given that this ankle was one that he tweaked twice in the space of a week. We saw him do it in a match sim a fortnight ago, and then he did it again on Friday and was withdrawn from Fremantle's intra-club as a result. So I think there obviously is a bit of instability in that joint, and it was as much as it is a devastating blow for him not to be able to play in this game. Obviously, round one is the big one for clubs and footballers. So conservative approach. The Dockers are saying it's minor, but we'll wait and see as to whether he does get on the park again in either of those pre-season clashes to come.
Shea Bolton's calf, do we expect him to play on Saturday night? And how bad do we think it is?
Yeah, he's obviously still a test to get out there, and he, like Pearce, would love to be out there, but he faces a fitness test at training this week, and the Dockers will make that decision on whether he does suit up for the All Stars. But if there is any doubt, which the Dockers have proven with their decision on Pearce, you'd expect he won't play, but the Dockers have always maintained that it has been a minor calf strain, and he's every chance to be out there.
I suspect this is a big game for Michael Walters. It's a great honour for him to be named the captain of the Indigenous All Stars team. He's been a wonderful, wonderful player for Fremantle, one of my favourite players to watch over the last 14 or 15 years. But it is going to be touch and go as to whether Sonny Walters is in Fremantle's best 23. He has a chance to put his best foot forward in a game like this and show that his body's still good and he's still got a few smarts and a bit of sparkle about him. Just how significant will Michael Walters' performance on Saturday night be, do you think?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head, Duff, and he's one who has had a very interrupted pre-season as well, and obviously has been in that rehab group since he had minor knee surgery during the Christmas break, and we haven't seen him in main training doing any of the drills and footy skills with the players, but we know that he doesn't lack any of that skill. He's been one of the most talented players on that Fremantle list for a long time now, and you'd just think that every bone in his body would be gearing up towards big performance on Saturday afternoon against his own club. But I think that's going to be the big question mark, is just how much he can show, given he has had an interrupted pre-season. The Dockers, and I guess the All-Stars, wouldn't have picked him as captain if they didn't think he was going to play and be available. But it has been a pretty, on and off pre-season for him, and you just hope that hasn't impacted his preparation for what is a showpiece game, not only for the All-Stars, but for him and how wonderful a servant he's been for Fremantle.
Andy Brayshaw said on Scotty and Goss for breakfast yesterday he's a 10 out of 10 to sign for Fremantle. Are we expecting an imminent announcement regarding a long-term contract deal for Andy Brayshaw?
It certainly sounds like there is significant hope that a deal can get done before round one, and we know that the Dockers do like to, reward their fans and do these grand contract announcements on big occasions, and I think the week of round one would be a pretty good way to do it, knowing that this time 12 months ago the Dockers announced that Justin Longmuir had signed a 1-year contract extension as senior coach. So it is one that's been bubbling away in the background. There's always been commitment and faith from both parties that it would eventually get done. But given that it is expected to be a long-term deal, and the Dockers still are trying to leave a bit of money in the war chest for some potential recruitments come the end of this year, it was always going to be about just negotiating those terms and making sure that Andy gets what he's worth, because he has been sort of there through the midst of this rebuild, coming into the club as a top 5 pick, sort of in that early stages of reshaping the list, and he's been the one to basically lead them back up into finals contention, and you'd expect a big season from him again this year.
Just one more before I let you go. David King said on SEN yesterday he believes minimum 13 wins for Fremantle. He thinks the Dockers will win 13 or more games, which means they will definitely play finals, and hopefully if they win 14 or 15, they'll be right in the mix. Is that a fair assessment of how you see the Dockers this year?
Absolutely, and I've gone a step further and tipped them in my top 4. I think the recruitment of Shea Belton, if he can stay fit, is a massive one for Fremantle in that forward line, who has been crying out for a sort of talented finisher who can, sort of put an exclamation mark on the work the rest of the Fremantle's forward line has done. And I think that the Dockers, it's all there for them this year. They've got an excellent midfield, as we know. Their back line's one of the strongest in the competition. And the forward line looks like it's going to go to another level this year with the added sort of emerging pieces of Josh Tracy and Jai Amos. So taking all that into account, I think they should be well and firmly in the fight for the top 4. The only caveat to that is that expectation has been a bit of a burden for Fremantle in recent years, and when we've expected big things from them, they've usually failed to get there, whereas when the opposite happens and we're not expecting much from them, they tend to surprise us all and come from nowhere. So I think that's going to be the big challenge for Fremantle, is that mental one, and knowing that they lost a few close games last season. It's been evident during preseason just how long and how physical and how tough their training sessions has been. So I have a suspicion that Phil Merriman, as much as a sick man he is at times, has been preparing the Dockers to go, harder for longer and be the team to come out on top in these close games. So I think it's all there for Fremantle, but we'll wait and see what unfolds.
Eliza, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. If you want to catch up with Eliza's stuff, and particularly that story on her own battle with concussion, Codesports is the place to read her stuff, and we look forward to talking to you more as the season goes on, Eliza.
Thanks, Duff.
Eliza Reilly from Codesports. We'll be back with more after the break.